You're listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and this is the show where you get expert advice about the heavy duty parts you buy and sell and keep you informed about what's happening in the industry. We have another great giveaway for you. We're giving away a set of 4 hubcaps. Now, these hubcaps aren't the kind of hubcaps you might be thinking. These hubcaps cut masking time by 90% and protects the hubs from primer and paint overspray. They're reusable each time you paint a rim, eco-friendly, and made of a recycled plastic that is virtually indestructible. They can be used on 22.5 and 24.5-inch rims for the rear hubs. Go to heavydutypartsreport.com/giveaways to enter the contest. It only takes 5 seconds to enter. Go to heavydutypartsreport.com/giveaways. Contest ends October 23rd, 2020. Did you know that lug nuts and airbags can get you into big trouble when you're on the road? Probably not something you've thought of before, but I'd like to introduce you to Jack Phelps, Vice President of Product Development, and Jim Keegan, Director of Sales at HQ Truck Parts. Jack and Jim have been in the heavy-duty parts industry for decades. They've both seen the high cost of wheel-offs and failing to meet DOT specifications. So I'd like to take a moment, first of all, to just welcome them both to the show. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jamie. How you doing?
Good. Glad you're here. Jim, so glad that you could be with us today.
Thanks, Jamie. I appreciate the opportunity.
So let's talk about safety first. Jim, maybe what you could do is, before we get into kind of the solution and the product that you sell, let's talk about the problem. What happens when a commercial truck or trailer has a wheel off? Maybe walk us through how that happens.
Sure. Well, first of all, wheels are designed to be locked in place with lug nuts. Okay. So what happens is, in commercial vehicles, most class 7 and 8 vehicles, the lugs, when the wheels are put on, they're torqued to about 450, anywhere from 450 to 500 foot-pounds. Okay. They're locked in place. The vehicle takes off and starts doing its business. What happens over time, 3 things can cause a wheel to come off. 1 would be bearing freeze up, 2 would be shear studs, and the number 1 reason in the industry that wheels come off of commercial vehicles are loose lug nuts. In other words, those lug nuts that were torqued to 500 foot-pounds can, and at times, start backing off. So they lose their torque, and as they lose their torque, they loosen up, and obviously those wheels will come off. Those are the 3 main reasons why wheels come off, and it is fairly prevalent. And for sure, loose lug nuts are an inherent problem in the commercial vehicle business.
So, Jim, obviously a truck or a trailer loses a wheel. This is a catastrophic failure. Who is at risk the most? I mean, obviously, there's several people we have to think about in this situation.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. Obviously, the general public. Highways, if you can Google wheel off situations, and you will see where wheels come off on highways. Usually that's the most dangerous area because of high speed. When that duals come off at 60, 70 miles an hour, it just causes immense damage. So highway fatalities from wheel offs are probably the largest problem out there. But the general public, the driver can be in a bad position if a front wheel comes off. You could have all kinds of serious problems, and it has happened, where that vehicle could flip, that type of situation. But really, everybody is a target when a wheel comes off.
Yeah, and when I think about this scenario, we really want people to understand the level of responsibility that a fleet has, and I mean, obviously, the loss of human life is the biggest part of our concern. We don't want that to happen. We want to prevent that at all costs. But just beyond that, there's also the liability of damage to property, injury to people, and the cost of just a simple lug nut backing off and a wheel coming off. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
so high.
it is high, and and most of the mechanics I know do a good job. They're diligent. They torque properly. They get those the right clamping pressure that's needed. But it's inherent in the commercial wheels that because of vibration and heat and ambient temperatures, that the lugs naturally will back off. And it takes a great maintenance program to keep those lugs always in the right position or the right torque, because they just have a natural tendency of backing off.
So you sell a solution to this problem. We've kind of deepened our understanding of how big of a problem it is. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about the solution.
Sure, if I may just hold this up. And this is a safety lug lock. It's a wheel nut locking system that was invented by a friend of mine in Canada about 9 years ago.
I love those
And
Canadians.
they are great. They are great. He came up with a solution. He came up with the idea, believe it or not, looking at a pair of handcuffs. Now the handcuffs weren't on him, but if you look at the safety lug lock, you can see the design. It looks like a pair of handcuffs or a pair of eyeglasses, actually. And what the lug lock is designed to do, it fits over two lugs, press fits over by hand or with a tool, and it locks the two lugs in place. So it creates resistance between the two lugs, and it cannot back off. So if you torque at 500 foot-pounds today, it's at 500 foot-pounds a week from now or a month from now. The only caveat to that is, of course, the broken studs or the frozen bearings, which could still cause a potential wheel off. But the lug lock has been proven. It's been out there for 9 years. We have really hundreds of fleets across America, across the world now, using our product. We are DOT approved by the state of Ohio, the state of Pennsylvania, and across the country.
There is some differences in the way that countries handle this issue. I know in Canada, whether you're automotive or commercial, when you have a wheel off for repair and then it gets put back on, they actually by law give you a tag that says, this must be retorqued by this many kilometers. In the States, I believe that that federal regulation isn't there. So is it really broken down by state regulation to kind of handle this? Because you mentioned DOT in only certain states.
Yeah, it really is. The states get to make those decisions. There's not necessarily a federal law that I know of, or regulation, I should say, that I know of. But there is what we try to advise people to do is follow the manufacturer's recommendations on torque on that wheel. That's the safest way to go for the mechanics for the fleet. Follow the recommendations. And like I said, again, it'll usually be 450 to 500 foot-pounds. Now with the safety lug lock, once you put it on, what my friend invented was a great idea. You can put it on and you can still do your torque checks without removing the lug lock. So they do hold them in place. We have 9 years of history. We have some of the largest fleets in America now mandating them. We have transit authorities throughout the country mandating the product because it works. It's a simple solution.
Hey, the simple solutions are the best. I have a business colleague in Vancouver, and his slogan is "Keep it simple, because simple is hard enough."
Absolutely, and that's the truth. And that's the inventor, Taffy Davies. He's the inventor. He's still involved, and he took quite a bit of time. If you go to our website, you'll be able to see all the independent test results. Then we have lists of fleets throughout the world that are using our product. Some of the best fleets in America are using the safety lug lock.
You're listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin. We've been speaking with Jim Keegan, Director of Sales at HQ Truck Parts, and we've also got Jack here with us. I think it's Jack's turn to kind of share some of his real knowledge with us. So I'm looking forward to this part of the conversation. Jack, can you explain the function of an airbag? Just describe to me some of the reasons why airbags fail.
The part of the air system and the suspension is not really something that is normally the problem for airbags per se, as something coming up and poking the air spring. In some cases, things loosen. One of the great things about air suspension, as compared to a spring suspension, there are a lot fewer moving parts that wear. As I said earlier, it's mostly something coming up off the highway and poking something. That's the only problem that the air spring has.
There's a big difference between cruising down a concrete interstate highway in good conditions and then, using your truck in a construction, agriculture, logging, mining, oil and gas environment. I know when selling airbags, I did see catastrophic failures, but like to your point, it almost never was a failure of the component, but rather environmental conditions that led to that catastrophic failure. But what about a slow leak? How can that impact the operation of an air system? And what are some of the kind of costs if you don't catch that when before DOT gets a hold of you?
The first thing that we're going to talk about a little bit, and there's not a lot to say, is a lift axle control module. That's a LACM, is what we call it. And a LACM is basically the valve that puts the air into the bags and takes it out. And what's good about the LACMs that we supply are that we have bigger ports, bigger piston, and what have you, so we get the air in and out in both ways, and they're driven by solenoids. Recently, because everything has to have a computer, looking at my watch, looking at my phone, so the LACMs that we supply senses the amount of air, which means how much weight is going across the scales. You can make sure that you've got the right amount of weight on each of these. And we call this an iLACM. And then there's a whole bunch of other things. For example, if it senses to not have enough air on that axle, it will automatically make that change instead of the driver in the cab having to think about it and make sure that all the axles have at least enough air in the bags so that the tires don't bounce.
If the air system is not distributing air evenly on an axle, this can create a safety issue. Is that the problem?
The axle bounces up and down, and that cups the tires. But I'm sure that if I look at DOT and ask them, they've always got something.
Let's not get DOT mad at us. So as those tires are bouncing up and down, though, that becomes a maintenance issue then. And what we're seeing is like damage to the tires. You could have a blowout. Obviously, too, there's going to be impact to the whole system, the whole axle. So that creates a maintenance issue for the truck.
Let me tell you what's going to happen in the future. And it's not right now, but it now has the capability to program things, okay? So if you're going around a curve too fast and it feels how much weight that's putting on, that will pump more to keep it from tipping over. It's just being developed, but that's the kind of thing putting a computer on a valve makes the valve more effective.
Right. So I mean, if we had a vehicle that had that air system that was not putting the air across the axle properly, that thing is bouncing, and then they go into a curve, there is the chance of rollover. And we've seen the development of new technology for rollover prevention. And so what you're explaining to me is that there is now not only just air valves controlling these air systems, but there's now computer actual chips, computer that are dedicated to just making sure that that air system stays level. Now, what happens if there's a slow leak in one of the airbags because a computer can't solve that problem?
The computer will sense that, tell the driver that they have that problem. And if it's a small leak, it'll keep pumping more and more and more air in there to keep it at the pressure it's supposed to be until it gets to the service place, and it will replace the air spring.
So that way, it actually creates the situation where it helps the truck get back to home, back to wherever it gets repaired, so that that can be, and because the driver's been notified, then they can pass that information on.
Yeah.
So we're getting a better understanding of the problem. We're getting a better understanding of where the technology is going. Let's talk about specifically the products that you're selling today and how they work.
We are currently selling the lift air controls. They're on a ton of OEs. The iLACM is brand new. We have several hundred installations, right?
Well, on the iLACM, we don't have several hundred. We have a number of tests out there. Again, it's the state of the art, first of its kind. It's patented. It's manufactured by a company called Norgren out of Colorado. And they were the first to come up with a intellectual automatic lift axle control system that really takes the driver out of the equation with lift axles. And that, Jamie, is going to be critical in the future. I like to compare it to going from an automobile with a stick shift to automatic transmission. That's kind of the scenario with the automatic lift axle. And it is available. We have a number of major fleets testing it right now, and all the test results have come back very well.
But the product is available now.
Oh, yeah, it's available through HQ. We have a special program on it. And if you're running lift axles and have any problems, fines are a big problem with lift axles, this will help solve that problem.
So when we're trying to communicate we're talking to our potential customers and we're trying to communicate the value of this product and also of the products that we talked about earlier in this episode. How would you go about, Jim, really talking to the customer and being able to explain to them the value, not just in terms of product, but in what the product does for the fleet?
Absolutely. And anytime you could add an upgrade and safety by any product, no matter the cost, you're going to be in a better position. You're going to create less liability for your fleet, for your drivers. For instance, just our standard lift axle control module, which is standard with all the major OEMs today, and we have it available. Then the standard spool valve, if you're running lift axles, which you're familiar with, our valve, and it's patented, actually actuates about 10 times faster than a standard spool valve. And if you're running lift axles, you know what a headache that is to wait for that lift axle to descend or ascend. So that's the type of products we deal with. The safety lug locks, again, are an upgrade in safety. It is a secondary safety feature. It's always up to the mechanic, really, when you're outfitting a vehicle with anything about safety. They're the last line of defense when you're trying to make a vehicle safer, again, in the sense of torquing the lugs properly, making sure your airbags don't have any leaks, that type of thing. So that's what we are. We look at innovative products. We're not looking for commodity items. So we've developed a nice niche market with the high-end products that we present to the industry.
You've been listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and today we've been speaking with Jack Phelps, Vice President of Product Development, and Jim Keegan, Director of Sales at HQ Truck Parts. To learn more, go to hqtruckparts.com. Jack, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Jamie.
Jim, really glad to have you here. Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin, and I just like to remind everyone to focus on cost per mile and let's keep those trucks and trailers rolling. You can watch our next video. Make sure to click the like button, write a comment, and don't forget to subscribe.